A good reaming. Hello, how are you? Good to see you. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This seems like a good day to do a show. And I'm doing another Pokemon segment. I have to tell everybody because it's a little embarrassing. But I promise it's super cool. It's not actually about Pokemon at all. It's about the story.
Another Pokemon segment. What are we even becoming?
Hey, we missed the April Fool's opportunity to do our other opener.
Yeah, which I just looked right now and I don't even see it loaded up. So now I'm doomed. So I'm gonna have to go back and find it because I've only got the real opener. Maybe I was just nervous I was gonna break it. So we'll have to go back and do it. We'll do April Fools on a different day. That's the ultimate fool, I think. That's the ultimate fool. So we did a thing with Lord Timothy Dexter the other day where we went and found information because of having played Pokemon Go. And now we found it again. Do you want to kind of prep up what this clip is going to bring to us today?
So once again, I spun a PokéStop and got intrigued. I normally don't like the PokéStops that are just a plaque, the boring photo, in my opinion. This one, though, said Elizabeth Morse, Witch of Newbury. And I was like, hold the phone. There's definitely a story here. So after that, I was off to the races, as you know, happens frequently these days. So I smelled a story and I had to go sniff it out.
I am under the impression that we have something a little wrong with our stream today because there's one whole live person showing, and I haven't seen a single comment from my parents, Chloe, Leslie, etc. So who knows? Maybe we're just streaming to ourselves today. Ah.
Well, if we are, we are. But the fact is, there is a problem with StreamYard and YouTube today, and we know there is, but it looks like it's going. So I don't know. Let's just do it and hope it stays for later.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's dig in and see what you found when you spun.
I wasn't planning to uncover colonial injustice this afternoon. I was just playing Pokemon Go. Again. Wandering through downtown Newburyport, Massachusetts, I spun a PokéStop. Up popped a name, Witch of Newbury. A weathered plaque, a woman I'd never heard of. Her name was Elizabeth Morse. Tried for witchcraft in 1680. Convicted, imprisoned, not hanged. Instead, she was sentenced to house arrest for life. And once I pulled that thread, I couldn't stop. Elizabeth Morse was a midwife, a wife, and a long-standing member of the community in Newbury. She lived with her husband William, a cobbler, and their young grandson John. In 1679, their house became the center of a storm. And not like the weather kind. Rocks pelted their roof. Furniture moved on its own. Shoes floated through the air, so they say. Tools tumbled down the chimney. You know, just a normal Tuesday in Puritan Massachusetts. At first, suspicion fell on the grandson, who whistled too much and answered questions too little or something, like whatever it was that upset Puritans about young person's behavior. Then a neighbor, Caleb Powell, suggested the boy might be playing tricks. But Caleb, a shipmaster and student of astrology, was already an object of suspicion. He knew things, not midwifery, not those kinds of things, the celestial kind. And that, in the 1600s, apparently was enough to make you the object of suspicion. So Caleb was accused of witchcraft, but acquitted. So the attention then turned to Elizabeth. In May of 1680, she was arrested, tried, and convicted. She was sentenced to death. But her husband William, loyal, persistent, and clearly not here for bad law, petitioned again and again for her release. Governor Bradstreet granted a reprieve. Instead of execution, Elizabeth was confined to her home. She could only leave on Sundays, and only to attend church escorted by a pastor or a deacon. She lived like that in a 16-rod radius, 264 feet, for the rest of her life. Not exonerated, not forgiven, just stuck. She died around 1693, still legally considered a witch. There's a stone for her in the burying ground of the first settlers in Newbury. It marks her memory, but not her resting place, because convicted witches couldn't be buried in sacred ground, even if they weren't really witches. The stone reads, "Convicted as a witch by her community, may she rest in peace beyond these walls." That hits different, doesn't it? As for her home, that stood at 31 Market Street. Today, it's a parking lot. Unceremonious, asphalted, ordinary parking lot. But right next door is the YWCA, an organization devoted to empowering women, to giving them shelter, opportunity, and space. So side by side, you've got two stories. One about a woman who was confined and silenced, and another about how far we've come. And it blows my mind to think that I found her story in a mobile game, not in a textbook, not on a tour, and I take a lot of tours, just a tap and a spin, and suddenly I was walking with Elizabeth. Sometimes history doesn't knock. Sometimes it just shows up in your pocket and doesn't let go. "264 feet radius from her house. That's it. Not a lot of space, obviously. She could maybe, I don't know what, putter around in the garden or something. She was basically literally going nowhere. And I don't know if you've had a chance to do the math, but it was for like 10 years. She lived 10 years like that.
It's kind of nuts, though. That part of the story where you said that they suspected the grandson because he knew a few things about stars. I was like, wow, the suspicions or something. But
They suspected the neighbor because he knew something about stars. But he was a sailor, like they all knew something about stars.
that was part of it. Something interesting, and you and I have, I mean, we live near Salem, so we see witch stuff a lot. The witch trials are here. It's popular. It's one of the things of the time. So one interesting detail, though, I was thinking while watching this was you uncovered or through your research that there were all kinds of examples of when it was clearly not because it was a witch. And this feels like that because it was 4 acres of kind of choice land in the center of Newburyport. Why were the other reasons people would call someone a witch, even though it wasn't quite so?
Oh gosh, personal grudges, right? We're Irish. Nobody holds a grudge like the Irish, except maybe the Puritans. In this case, if you had something that your neighbors wanted, you're pretty screwed. Like somebody was going to want to take it from you. So Elizabeth Morse's husband was a cobbler. So I don't know how he had, I mean, he must have been like a successful cobbler because he had 4 acres of pretty choice land around Newbury. Then this is the 1600s, so it's very early days. Obviously, it's not developed to any great extent. That's where they were. She did not get to meander all 4 acres, by the way, during her confinement. 264 feet radius from the house, just saying. They couldn't even give her the 4 acres. But that is the impetus for most of the witch cases. There is also some instances of like romantic rivals or something. If a woman wanted to get another woman out of the way, sometimes they just didn't like a woman because she was educated. Maybe she was independent minded. Maybe she owned her own business. That certainly happened. Sometimes they just didn't like that. And they would just accuse her of witchcraft to kind of get her out of the way. They didn't want independent women planting ideas in other women's minds because women were supposed to be submissive, etc.
The other thing, too, all those reasons, but also sometimes, like you said, just because people could be kind of weird or a little not typical, or, women who wore pants or something, or women who wanted their hair in a different style than was the fashion and the mode of the time. Like, it is interesting to know that, like, being weird was a quick path to being called a witch. And it made
Yeah.
me think, I wonder if people in Salem now, like when we go to Salem, what do we see? We see lots of people with multicolored hair and lots of strange outfits and their own extra things that they're bringing with them to Salem. Do you think that's why maybe there's some fascination with this?
Because those kinds of people still go to Salem. Not exactly. I don't know why this catches the public's attention in a way that other incredible injustices have not, like the Japanese being interned right during World War II. Like no one talks about that hardly. It's very difficult now. You'd have to go looking for information. There's folks talking about it, but I mean, they don't like it's not publicized, and they definitely don't like celebrate that history the way Salem celebrates witch history. It's like, yeah, it was terrible. We acknowledge it. And yet come here for Halloween because super fun haunted stuff. So I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that it was women. Maybe it's the fact that it can be, in theory, tied to a fun holiday. I think when you dig into who was accused of witchcraft at the time, it's certainly a thread of being independent minded women. But the property motivation was very, very real because the second you submitted to the jurisdiction of the court under a charge of witchcraft, you would surrender all of your goods and property. And so, like the sheriff would take possession of it in theory as custodian for I don't know if it was like the county or the state, but the reality was the sheriff sat on some pretty choice property, his own self, at least in Salem. There's a pretty heavy duty motivation. Property disputes like boundaries or whatever, a neighbor might accuse you of witchcraft and then also like shove the boundary over or something to try and solve that problem. It's discouraging. That's actually why Giles Corey was pressed to death with stones, because he was never convicted of witchcraft. He never even submitted to the jurisdiction of the court in Salem. He refused. He was like this cantankerous old guy and just flat out refused to submit to the jurisdiction of the court, which meant his property passed to his heirs, his daughter, I think. So they never got their hands on his. He was pretty, I mean, it's impressive, honestly, how stubborn he was. And yet, so the money motivation for sure. And why people still talk about it, I have to think it's just the idea that it's partly women empowerment, speaking to these stories that will never be told otherwise. Women's history, as you know, is a pet project of mine because those stories so often disappear.
That's the thread that runs through it in my mind for you, is that, you're into Tudor history, you're into Gilded Age history, and, picking off this as a random Pokemon Go experience was another dive into something interesting about women. And I find that fascinating. That kind of leads us towards the next little clip I put together, which was, I thought maybe some people would be interested to know how we put these sorts of things together, like why it even comes about and all that. And in my mind, there's sort of three parts of it, right? There's the idea generation, then there's the filming to capture what we have, and then there's the editing and producing. This thing I'm going to show doesn't have a whole lot of the editing and producing. And in your case, yours are all edited by Dan Gorgone. In my case, I do it myself. And you can always tell because mine are always sloppier and always, there's frayed animals and, stutters and stuff like that. Before we, put out my clip that I did of the behind the scenes of you shooting all this, what did I miss in that? Like, as far as when we decide to put a clip together, and we could at least hint about the fact that we're going to do a couple more of these PokéStop stories, and maybe we could talk about like why that became interesting as a topic.
I'm a history nerd for sure, but I think one of the things you'll find, even if you go back and look at who we had on the backpack show, all the people that I found for that show, it was just because I was curious about something. Like, what's it like to be an Irish sheep farmer? I wonder if I could find like a First Nation rapper. I wonder if there's if there's like some minority chocolatiers we could find and stuff like that. Just curiosity, and I was wondering about things, and that's an affliction I've had my whole life. So I can't spin a PokéStop and see something like Elizabeth Morse Witch of Newbury and not have questions. Like I have several, And I want answers quickly. So what I tend to do is go and find some sort of surface internet resources, put them into Chat GPT, because that's a really good aggregator of information and get kind of the broad brush story. Then if there's a resource nearby I can go to, like for the Timothy Dexter story, I was able to go to the local library, find a copy of his book in the archives with the librarian, there to get it out for me and stuff, and actually look it over. There are trial transcripts for Elizabeth Morse, but they're on file in Boston, and I don't know how many people get access to them. There is a prison where she was held prior to her trial in Ipswich. So like I could have gone to Ipswich, but it's like I don't know if the prison's even still there. Be going for like a plaque about the prison. But there's just so much to learn, and I get really interested in chasing down every detail. So I start with the broad strokes, then I dig deeper into the archival sources, if it's possible to find them.
So in some cases, when Dan is putting together your story, he uses all the B-roll that you come up with and finds a way to put it all in. Some cases, he doesn't. This one, he didn't use a bunch of the B-roll in some cases because, maybe you had so much narrating story that maybe the B-roll wasn't covering it. And Dan is really like good at making sure the visuals match the story, where I'm like, I own some film and I will put it in this piece. So you'll see in my behind the scenes that we go and find the grave where Elizabeth Morse was commemorated, because you had an interesting point you said about the fact she is probably not in this cemetery.
Boy, did that piss me off. So it's bad enough she's tried and convicted of witchcraft. Most people at that point, their story's over, they'd be hanged. So let's just put that on the table. Her husband put himself at some significant risk continuing to petition for her release. And I can't even believe he was successful, but bless, plenty of guys would have been like, I'll just go find a younger wife. I don't know, start over. Plus, he could have been convicted of witchcraft himself. Who knows? You signed the devil's book. So I was very impressed with the fact that he did that kind of at all. But she still lived a life of incredible confinement after that point for 10 solid years, only released to go to church. And I was like, oh man, because my first thought was like prop up a dummy in the window and then like screw off to some other place and never come back again. But now you have to show up for church every week. Like that's almost worse, because now she's truly stuck because they're going to be checking. So I thought about that. And then the fact that when she died, they wouldn't even bury her in consecrated ground. This really pissed me off. And in fact, you can't find where she's buried today. Nobody knows, because women's stories, women's births, women's deaths, unless they're like a queen, are so infrequently recorded. When you go really far back in history, it's difficult sometimes to suss out. So yes, part of it's my modern sensibilities and the injustice of it all. But also, don't talk to me about sacred ground and everything, because the dudes buried in that got up to plenty of shenanigans. Just saying. Oh, they did make a pamphlet. I should show you this for the burial ground. There's a little plastic thing, and inside, the people who have a little, board of trustees of the first settlers burial ground in I guess it's Newbury. They have made these little plastic things. Copyright 2019. So this thing's been sitting in that little plastic case, waiting for someone to care enough to come along and take it. And I was that person who took one of their pamphlets.
You grabbed it up. So we have, Chloe said, it's fun because your curiosity brings us so many interesting stories we'd never know otherwise. And Mohammed, hi Mohammed, says, such a unique blend of history and tech. I never thought a PokéStop could lead to something this deep. Great example of creative storytelling and digital discovery, which is a perfect lead in, Mohammed. Thank you for my little behind the scenes that I shot of this, which will be differently edited. All right, so we have this whole new idea that we're doing with PokéStop Adventures. So we're in another spot in Newburyport going to capture one. What's the process for you? Because this is kind of your idea that you've gemmed up. What's the process? Why do you put this together? And what do you look for in one of these segments?
Gosh, well, it's just my curiosity. I followed it for the backpack show. I follow it for this. So I've been playing Pokemon GO since like last August in Newburyport a lot, because there's a lot of stops. And so if I come across one that sounds interesting, I go, I wonder what that's about. And if it's one of those things that I could see myself going down a rabbit hole about, I consider it for a segment now.
Okay, so we found the stop that we're gonna do. What's the process now?
All right, well, first, I wear glasses, but it's easier to look at my camera if I take them off. So if you ever see me with them on top of my head, that's the reason. I get my camera ready, my Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, which is probably one mark more than I needed for the job. My lens, I can't remember, it's the one that you made me use, and it's actually capturing a much wider range of stuff than I at first thought it would. So I was like, why is the shot so wide? I can see so much stuff, and I've gotten used to it. It's now all I shoot on. I've tried other lenses that get more up close. I prefer this one because I have more versatility. I can capture more, I can get closer and get exactly what I want. So I learned from you learned it from someone else, but I learned from you that if the shot's not good enough, you're not close enough. So now I just get closer when I want a better shot. This is not usually my jam. This is black. Blacks are boring, but witches are interesting. So I'm gonna get this one because witches are interesting. So I get a couple different types of shots. I'll keep one steady on for maybe like 10 seconds or 15 seconds. Then I'll do the same shot again, but moving this time. And whichever we need in the final edit, like that's the one we'll use. So I actually knew this once and then forgot it and have relearned it, but I can see myself reflected in surfaces.
So normally we just do this in kind of one spot, but we went on a little journey here. Now we're in Newbury. Why are we here?
Yeah. Because there is a stone here, and it's not necessarily where Elizabeth Morse is buried, but it is a stone memorializing her. So this is where some of the first settlers of Old Newbury, as it has come to be known, are buried.
When you are done collecting all this footage and have done a little bit more research, what's the last few steps before you make this a clip for our show?
Well, I gather as many facts as I'm able, and I put them into ChatGPT and tell it what we're doing, and then it spits out a draft script, which is usually awful. And I just use it as like a starting point, refine it, and then record it. And it usually aligns pretty well to the B-roll I've gotten because I make sure that it does by inputting the correct facts. And there you have it. Record, put the B-roll footage over it with a little help from one Daniel Gorgone, and Bob's your mother's brother. Jaunty music.
Seemed like, the right noise for this job there. Did I miss anything in the setup, or that's pretty it? That's kind of how we do it.
I did want to share a little bit about the way I use ChatGPT. I have a pretty sophisticated writing GPT, custom GPT, made it for work, and it's really, really good. Though I should say, like the draft you normally would get from just plain old ChatGPT would be complete garbage. It's actually decent. I'll say this too, though. What I use it for primarily is research and aggregation. So obviously I can write a script, it's easy, but it's much faster using ChatGPT because it can pull from all the different sources I input. It can also search the web for more, but then you've got to validate what it says because, it can wholesale make things up. So I do that, but I'll say things like, okay, what sites related to Elizabeth Morse can I still visit? Where can I go to get B-roll? That's how I found out about that stone in the burial ground in Newbury. That's also how I know there's nobody knows where she's actually buried. That's how I knew where she went to church. I actually tried to go and get footage of the church that she was allowed to go to, but that building is gone now. It's like a different building down the street. And I know it's probably picky, but I was like, no, I don't want to lie on my video. But so what you noticed, we had a lot of B-roll of kind of the tail end of her story where we could show where her house used to be, like whatever. But there you go. That parking lot's probably about as far as she could walk. We could go and get that stone. We could have got, I guess, the empty space where their church used to be. Wouldn't have been too exciting. I could have gone to get the prison. There just wasn't a lot we could go and get that still exists. So that section, kind of her trial, conviction, imprisonment, was a little bit thin on B-roll. What we did have and were able to get, Dan put where it was relevant to the story. So it was a little bottom heavy, I guess.
What can you do? It got done. We got it done. This is all from just spinning a PokéStop. One, which happens to be not that far from your Starbucks of choice, and well, no, your second choice. And but a proximate Starbucks, and that's kind of fun. And I mean, I think what we'll do is we'll probably, when we find a kind of interesting stop, we might try to put together a couple more stories like this. Who knows? Maybe we'll evolve it into more. Because the whole point of Play for a Time was, what do you do to kind of extend your capabilities? How do you get outside of yourself? How do you get outside your house even? What do you do as you're aging to stay engaged? This is a perfect blend of many of those things to stay engaged, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's not about the game. The game is the bridge for me that gets me out of the house and looking at these obscure little plaques and sites that I might walk by and ignore ordinarily. So it draws my attention to these stories that very few people have ever heard before, except for maybe some small, dedicated group of locals who wants to like keep local history alive. So to me, it's an untapped gold mine. It's like a treasure map where I can find little stories. We all love stories. I mean, who doesn't?
So I think we're going to find a few more of those and bring them along. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I found that thing that we were supposed to play for April Fools. Well, you found it. And I put it up and got it ready to go. So I think we're going to use this as our exit credits to get on out of here. So thank you, Dan, for putting this together. It was a lot of fun.